change.
Tremendous benefits to the Canadian citizens.
President Trump's relationship with Canada.
An economy that delivers.
I'm a very artistic.
Canada, Pete Hoekstra, told business audiences that he was disappointed by how few Canadians seemed passionate about the partnership between the two countries. Within days, Prime Minister Mark Carney was asked to respond, and his answer was measured rather than heated.
Changed via social media post. We did hear from the Prime Minister in the last hour as he was leaving for a crucial summit in Asia. Donald Trump will be there.
He did not raise his voice at Washington. Instead, he restated a single principle. Canada would sign a trade arrangement only if it served Canadians. Behind that calm reply sat a much larger question that still hangs over both governments today, and it is the question I want to unpack with you now. To understand what happened, we need to be precise about who said what and when. Pete Hoekstra is the United States ambassador to Canada. He was appointed to the post in April of 2025, having previously served as the Republican Party chair in Michigan and, during Donald Trump's first term, as ambassador to the Netherlands. His role places him at the center of one of the most consequential economic relationships in the world, and his public comments carry weight precisely because he is understood to have a direct line to the American president. The first set of remarks came at a keynote address to the Canadian International Council. There, Hoekstra told the audience that the American side had been hopeful about reaching a broader agreement with Canada, something that would go well beyond the existing Continental Trade Pact.
At home, and that's the focus of Budget 2025, generational investment here in Canada, and what we can also control or at least heavily influence is developing new.
He said the United States had wanted to expand cooperation across areas such as energy, automotive manufacturing, and nuclear defense. But he concluded that, at least for the moment, that larger deal was not going to happen. His words signaled that the ambition on the American side had run into practical limits. The second set of remarks, delivered to the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, was more pointed in tone. Asked what had surprised him since arriving in Canada, Hoekstra said the most unexpected thing was how difficult it was to find Canadians who felt passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. He described the recent Canadian election campaign as anti-American, referencing the "elbows up" slogan that had become a rallying cry during that period. He acknowledged that the business community still valued the partnership, but he suggested ordinary Canadians did not share that enthusiasm, and he called that disappointing.
And he senses that there's a trophy to be had, and we can give him that trophy so he wins a rhetorical game in this. In the end, I don't think the market is freaking out that this massive
pointing. That is the comment that generated the most attention, and it is worth pausing on why. The phrase "elbows up" comes from hockey, and during 2025, it became shorthand in Canada for standing firm against external pressure. When the ambassador framed that sentiment as anti-Americanism, he was, in effect, characterizing a national mood. Many Canadians heard it differently. They saw their reaction not as hostility toward Americans as people, but as a response to the tariffs and the political rhetoric that had strained the relationship in the first place. That brings us to Prime Minister Carney's reply. When reporters asked him about the ambassador's disappointment, Carney did not deliver a personal rebuke. He made 3 points, and each one is worth understanding on its own terms.
Unequivocally was a free trader, and he's the man who first initiated a free trade deal back in the 80s between Canada and the United States. I think Doug Ford...
First, he said the bigger deal the ambassador had described, an arrangement in the interest of both the United States and the Canadian people, was not on the table at that moment, though he added that it remained possible in the future. He was careful not to slam the door. His second point was about the strength of Canada's existing position. Carney pointed out that Canada and Mexico already held the best functioning trading arrangements with the United States. In other words, the framework that governed the vast majority of North American trade was still in place and still working. He was reminding everyone that Canada was not negotiating from a position of desperation. The default arrangement already delivered predictable access to the American market for most goods. His third point concerned process and principle. Carney explained that a formal review of the Continental Trade Agreement was just beginning, with consultations happening in each country. While those consultations continued, bilateral discussions with the United States would carry on, and improvements might emerge along the way. But he framed the bottom line simply: a deal is a deal, and any agreement has to work for both sides. Canada, he said, would only agree to terms that were in the best interest of Canadians. Notably, he also described the ambassador as doing a very good job, a deliberately gracious note that took the personal edge out of the moment. I want to examine why that tone matters, because in diplomacy, the delivery is often as significant as the content. Carney did not insult the ambassador, and he did not escalate. By pairing a firm principle with a courteous acknowledgement, he kept the disagreement about substance rather than personality. That approach is harder to caricature and harder to provoke. It also reflected a consistent message he had been repeating for months, that Canada would not accept a bad deal simply to meet a deadline or to satisfy political pressure from across the border. To understand why this exchange carried such weight, we need to look at what happened earlier in the year. Throughout 2025, the trade relationship between the two countries was under significant strain. The United States, under President Trump, had imposed tariffs affecting a range of goods, and Canada had responded with countermeasures and support for the industries most exposed to the pressure, including lumber, steel, automotive manufacturing, and aluminum. The president had also repeatedly raised the idea of Canada becoming what he called the 51st state, rhetoric that continued after Carney took office and that many Canadians found deeply objectionable. That backdrop is essential context. When the ambassador expressed puzzlement at the cooler public mood in Canada, Canadian commentators and officials were quick to note that the mood had a clear cause. One member of the Prime Minister's Canada-United States Relations Council captured the frustration bluntly, suggesting that a dog that is kicked cannot be blamed for snarling back.
I said we had to do two things. First is to be a bastion, the second is to be a beacon, an example to a world that's at sea.
The point being made was that the strained atmosphere did not appear out of nowhere. It followed a period of tariffs, threats, and uncertainty that had unsettled households and businesses across the country. There is also an important procedural development at the heart of this story, and it is the piece that gives the exchange its lasting significance. Around the same time as the ambassador's comments, the United States formally began consultations to review the North American Trade Agreement, evaluating how the pact had performed over its first 5 years.
Tariffs against Canada, just that talks would be on hold. It will be up to Mark Carney now to see if he can repair this relationship in the coming days, if that's even possible through the end of this year.
That move started the clock on a lengthy process. It signaled that formal negotiations to review the agreement could begin in early 2026, setting up an extended period of talks between the three partner countries.
Yeah, it's certainly ramped up the pressure for this trip, hasn't it? Paula, we appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to bring in Robin Farzad. He is a business journalist and host of the Full Disclosure podcast.
In response, Canada announced that it would launch its own formal consultations. The Office of the Minority Responsible for Canada-United States Trade indicated that the government would seek public feedback and would engage with industry leaders, provinces and territories, and Indigenous partners as part of the process. This is the machinery of trade policy at work. Before governments sit down to renegotiate, they gather input from the people and sectors who will live with the results. It is slow, deliberate, and often invisible to the public, but it shapes the eventual outcome. That timing is what elevates the ambassador's remarks from a passing comment to a meaningful signal. When he said a bigger deal was not going to happen, at least for now, he was effectively lowering expectations at the very moment the review was beginning.
One of their trading partners to different degrees. And it's in that context that our officials, my colleagues, have been working with their American.
And when Carney said the bigger deal was not on the table but remained possible, he was doing something similar from the other direction, keeping the door open while making clear that Canada would not chase an expanded arrangement for its own sake. Both statements were, in their own way, positioning ahead of a long negotiation. Let me lay out the positions of each side as clearly as I can, because they are not as far apart as the headlines might suggest. From the American perspective, as the ambassador described it, there had been genuine hope for a broader partnership. The United States wanted an agreement it considered fair, and it saw potential to deepen cooperation across energy, minerals, automotive, and defense. When that broader vision did not materialize quickly, the American side chose to proceed with the standard review of the existing agreement, rather than continue reaching for something larger. From the Canadian perspective, the priority was protection of national interests. Carney and his ministers had repeatedly stated that Canada would not sign an agreement that failed to serve Canadians, and that the objective was not to reach a deal at any cost. Canada wanted an arrangement that preserved and stabilized the trade relationship without limiting the country's ability to pursue other opportunities around the world. That last part is important because it points to a strategic choice that runs underneath the entire dispute. There is also a broader economic dimension here that deserves attention. The Continental Trade Agreement covers an enormous share of the commerce between Canada and the United States, with the large majority of that trade flowing without tariffs under the existing rules. That is why Carney has been comfortable describing Canada's current arrangement as favorable compared with the terms other countries face. The existing framework, whatever its imperfections, provides a stable foundation. Any renegotiation carries the risk of disturbing that stability, which is precisely why both governments are approaching the review with caution. To understand why this matters for ordinary people, we need to look past the diplomatic language. Trade agreements are not abstractions. They determine whether a manufacturer in Ontario can ship parts across the border without added costs, whether a farmer in the prairies can count on predictable access to American buyers, and whether a worker in an auto plant keeps a job that depends on integrated supply chain.
But we can show that another way is possible, that the arc of history isn't destined to be warped towards authoritarianism and
When negotiators talk about steel, aluminum, or automotive provisions, they are talking about the livelihoods of real communities on both sides of the border. That is why the cooler public mood the ambassador described is not simply a matter of sentiment. For many Canadians, the tariffs of 2025 were felt directly through uncertainty about employment and the future of their industries. It is difficult to feel enthusiastic about a partnership when you fear losing your job or worry about the survival of your business. Some Canadian observers suggested that a more realistic goal than passion might simply be a steady, pragmatic relationship, one built on shared interest rather than warm feeling. That framing may be close,